Hello, Sir Imam and friends. Today, our group that consists of Grace, Anastasia, Aisha, Marcia, and Charlene will discuss about chapters 4 and 5. And please keep in mind that we will not cover all of the materials that is on the ebook, but instead we'll only cover those that are in the syllabus because of time constraint. And I hope this presentation will be beneficial for all of us. Have fun watching!
Before going on further, we should know that there are three terms that we will discuss in this topic that are affects, emotions, and moods. The term affect refers to a wide range of sentiments encompassing both emotions and moods. The term emotions refers to strong feelings directed against someone or something. Moods are less strong experiences than emotions, and they frequently occur without a specific cause. You can also see more explanation about the three terms from the diagram above about how they are related to one another. Next is the basic emotion. By investigating how we express our emotions, psychologists have attempted to define our basic emotions, though it's been tough to decide based on our facial emotion. It's very unlikely for psychologists to ever completely agree on a set of basic emotions, but still some researchers agree that we have 6 basic emotions that are anger, fear, sadness, happiness, disgust, and surprise. Next is moral emotions. Moral emotions or feelings with moral implications as a result of our immediate assessment of the situation that inspires them have been studied by researchers. Sympathy for others, pain, guilt over our own immoral actions, anger over injustices done to others, and disgust for those who act unethically are all examples of moral emotions. Another example is moral disgust, which is the dissatisfaction when we experience moral rules are broken. Disgust is not the same as moral disgust. If you walked in cow poo by accident, you could be upset and you could feel disgusted. But that is not the case for morally disgusted. Consider the case if you saw a video of a police officer making a racist remark. You may be disgusted in a different way. It offends your sense of right and wrong. Moral emotions are not universal like inherent emotions, since they are taught generally in childhood. Moral feelings differ from culture to culture because morality is a cultural construct. As a result, we must be mindful of the moral elements of events that provoke strong emotions and ensure that we fully comprehend the context before acting, specifically in the workplace. Next, we have the basic moods, positive and negative affect. Emotions will be divided into 2 categories that are the positive and negative. A positive emotion is one that expresses a pleasant opinion or sentiment. Negative emotion are the polar opposite of positive feelings. It is important to remember that emotions cannot be neutral because if it's neutral, then we are being emotionless. Positive affect is a mood dimension comprised of positive feelings such as excitement, enthusiasm, and exhilaration at the high end, as seen in the figure above. Negative affect, on the other hand, is a mood dimension that includes uneasiness, tension, and worry at the extremes, experiencing moods and emotions. For most people, positive moods are somewhat more common than negative moods. Indeed, research finds a positivity offset, meaning that at zero input, most individuals experience in a mildly positive mood. Next, we have functions of emotions. Emotions are a mystery in certain aspects. Organizational behaviorists have discovered, as we discussed, that emotions can be essential to a well-functioning workplace. Let's talk about 2 key areas where emotions might help you perform better, that are rationality and ethical. The first one, do emotions make us irrational? How often have you heard someone say, "Oh, you're just being emotional"? You might have been offended by that words. Such observations imply that logic and emotion are at odds, and that displaying emotion means we are acting irrationally. This, however, is incorrect. Our emotions really help us think more clearly. Why? Because our emotions give vital information about how we see the environment and drive our actions. Individuals in a bad mood, for example, may be better able to distinguish between true and accurate information than those in a good mood. The second one, do emotions make us ethical? Numerous studies suggest that moral judgments are largely based on feelings rather than on cognition, even though we tend to see our moral boundaries as logical and reasonable, not emotional. Our ideas are molded to some extent by organizations, which influences whether or not our shared feelings are correct. Unfortunately, this sensation sometimes leads us to rationalize simply emotional reactions as ethical. Even when we strive to be neutral, we tend to criticize out-group members harsher than in-group members for moral violations. We can better predict behavior and manage people when we can recognize emotions and moods. Next, we will discuss about where do emotion and moods come from. The first one is personality. Certain moods and feelings are more often experienced by certain persons than by others. People can have varying intensities of the same feelings. The extent to which they are affected is referred as affect intensity. The second one is time of day. According to studies, the majority of us follow the same pattern. Positive impact levels tend to peak in the late morning and then stay there until early evening. Positive effect begins to decline approximately 12 hours after waking and continues until midnight. Negative effect fluctuates less than positive effect. According to most studies, it tends to rise throughout the course of day with the lowest level in the morning and the highest level at night. The third one is day of the week. Is it true that individuals are in their best moods on weekends? That is true in most cultures. Adults had most happy feelings on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and the least positive feelings on Monday. Next one is weather. The phenomenon of illusory correlation, which occurs when we identify two events that have no genuine connection, explains why individuals believe weather has an impact on their productivity or moods. For example, employees may be more productive on days when the weather is not good. The next one is stress. As we all know, stressful events negatively affect moods. Next is social activities. Physical or casual activities are more strongly linked to increases in good mood than formal ones or passive ones. Sleep can also be your source of emotions and mood. Increased tiredness puts employees at risk of sickness, injury, and even depression. Poor sleep quality impacts moods and decision making. Sleep deprivation makes it harder to maintain emotional control. Even one bad night's sleep makes us angrier and more prone to taking risks. Probably because poor sleep reduces work satisfaction and affects our ability to make ethical decisions. Next is exercise. I think we all have heard that exercise can actually increase your positive moods through pumping up your endorphins that can also reduce your stress. Next is age. One study of people ages 18 to 94 revealed that negative emotions occur less as people get older. Next is sex. Many people believe women are more emotional than men. It may appear that we are all unsuspecting slaves to our emotions and moods by now. This may be accurate on an internal experience level. However, we know from professional experiences that individuals do not communicate every fleeting feeling that crosses our minds. Let's start with emotional labor and apply what we have learned about emotions and moods to workplace coping methods.
Next is about emotional labor. Emotional labor is an employee's expression of organizationally desired emotions during interpersonal transactions at work. However, the way we experience an emotion is not obviously always the same as the way we show it. For example, we expect flight attendants to be cheerful, funeral directors to be sad, and doctors to be emotionally neutral. However, deep inside, they might not feel the same as the way they express it, because felt emotions are our actual emotions, and displayed emotions are those the organization requires us to show and considers appropriate in a given job. Next is the difference between surface acting and deep acting. Surface acting is hiding one's feelings and foregoing emotional expressions in response to display rules. Surface acting deals with displayed emotions. For example, if customer service shows cheerful expressions without actually trying to be cheerful or be happy at that day, they are surface acting. In contrast, deep acting is trying to modify our true feelings based on displayed rules. For example, if the customer service really tries to be actually happy and cheerful when they are doing their job, they are deep acting. The disparity between employees having to project one emotion while feeling another is called emotional dissonance. Next is about affective events theory. This theory explains that employees react emotionally to things that happen to them at work, and these reactions influence their job performance and satisfaction. The extent to which one's personality is negative or positive is related to emotional reactions when experiencing workplace events, and that these are related to workplace attitudes and behaviors. This theory explains two major things. The first one is emotions provide valuable insights into how workplace events influence employee performance and satisfaction. The second one is employees and managers shouldn't ignore emotions or the events that cause them. Even when they appear minor, they can accumulate. For example, the company is downsizing. You might experience negative emotions, and those emotions may take over you, and you will spend your time more worrying rather than working. Thus, your job satisfaction and performance will also be down. Next one is emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is a person's ability to perceive emotions in the self and others, understand the meaning of these emotions, regulate his or her own emotions accordingly based on the situation. The pros of having this skill is it is something that anyone can learn, and it can help to reduce bullying because it increases empathy and it improves a person's social effectiveness so they can interact with others better, and it reduces the likelihood of engaging in personally destructive behavior. Because we understand the feeling of ourselves and others, we tend to avoid those behavior that results negatively. And we making decisions become a lot faster because we use our feelings in decision making, and it can be used in any environment, situation, and circumstances. As for the cons, the first one is it can be used to manipulate people because we can control how other feelings, and it prevents other from using their critical thinking skills because we tend to use our feelings too much when deciding something, and it can be used for personal gain. It can make a person be more open and agreeable, and it takes time to develop the skill because it is a skill that we must practice habitually, and we can't learn it through textbooks. Emotional intelligence is also a skill that not everyone takes seriously.
So the next topic that we are going to cover is about how to apply the concept of emotions and mood in an organization behavior. So, our understanding of emotion and moods can affect many aspects of organization behavior, including the first one is selection. So, research said that employers should start consider using emotional intelligence as a factor in hiring employees, especially for jobs that actually demand a high degree of social interactions. Nowadays, many recruiters are starting to use emotional intelligence, and it has actually shown a significant impact to the company because employees who take the emotional intelligence course, they were actually 2.6% more successful than those who didn't. And then the next one is when talking about decision making. So moods and emotions, they can have effects on decision making that managers should understand. People with positive emotions, they can enhance problem solving skill and they tend to find better solutions. Meanwhile, people with negative emotions, they usually make stronger choices, but the choices are not necessarily better. And they may take higher risks than when in a positive mood. But taken together, moods and emotions can always impact decision making, but that there are other variables that requires further research. So we cannot only rely on moods and emotions only. And then the third one is creativity. So creativity is influenced by emotions and moods. So research suggests that people in good moods tend to be more creative than people in bad moods. Why? Because people in good moods, they usually produce more ideas and more options. They are also more flexible and they are more open in their way of thinking, which is what may explain why they are more creative. However, some researchers do not believe that positive moods makes people more creative because they believe individuals who worry more, they may perform better on creative tasks than those who are less neurotic. Therefore, it is actually better to conceptualize moods as an active feeling, such as feeling sad or feeling happy, and all of the activating moods, whether in a positive or a negative term, it seemed to lead to more creativity, whereas the activating moods actually lead to less. And then the fourth one is motivation. So some studies reported that people with positive moods, they usually have more abilities to solve problems, work harder at them, and actually did solve them as a result. And a cycle can be created in which positive moods, it can cause people to be more creative. And when people are more creative, it leads to a positive feedback from people who observe their work. And the feedback further reinforces the positive moods, which makes them perform even better, and so on. And then 5 is leadership. So leaders are perceived as more effective when they share positive moods. Why? Because their followers are more creative in a positive emotional environment. But what happens when leaders are in negative moods? So when leaders are in negative moods, leaders usually displays it to increase the analytic performance of the followers. Perhaps because followers actually attended more closely to tasks to help the leaders. And then there's negotiation, which several studies suggest that a negotiator who feigns anger has an advantage over an opponent. Because when a negotiator shows anger and the opponent concludes that the negotiator has conceded all he or she can, so gives in. However, the anger should be used selectively in negotiation, because angry negotiators who have less information and less powers than their opponents, they usually have significantly worse outcomes. Next is customer service. So people often relate customer service with emotional contagion, or it is also known as the catching of emotions from others. So what happens when people experience positive emotions? They usually laugh or they smiles at it, and the opponent usually respond positively as well. And of course, the opposite is true with negative emotions, and that is what people expected in a good customer service. And there is also job attitudes. It appears that a positive mood at work can spill over your off-work hours at home. So a negative mood at work can be restored to a positive mood after break. Thus, the relationship between moods and job attitudes is actually reciprocal, which means the way our workday goes colors our moods, but our moods also affects the way we see our jobs. And then there's deviant workplace behaviors. People can behave in ways that violate established norm and threaten their organization, its member, or both. These actions are called counterproductive work behaviors, which we have learned in chapter 1. And people who feel negative emotions, they are more likely than others to engage in a short-term deviant behavior at work. The example is gossiping at work, surfing the internet at work, and though negative emotions can also lead to a more serious form of counterproductive work behaviors. The last one is safety and injury at work. So research suggests that employee in negative emotions, they can increase injuries at work. Why? Because individuals in negative moods, they tend to be more anxious, which can make them less able to cope effectively with hazards. And negative moods also make people more distractible, and distraction can obviously lead to a careless behavior. Okay, next we are going to talk about chapter 5, which is about personality and values. Okay, because we're going to talk about personality, let's first understand what is the meaning of personality. So, personality is the sum of ways in which an individual reacts to and interacts with others. We most often describe personality in terms of the measurable traits a person can exhibit. So, how do we measure someone's personality? So, we can measure it using personality tests, because personality tests are useful in hiring decisions, and it can also help managers forecast who is best for a certain jobs. The most common means of measuring personality is through a self-report surveys in which individuals can evaluate themselves on a series of factors. However, we must be aware that there are some problems that may arise, such as different results, because naturally or in general, when people know that their personality scores are going to be used on hiring decisions, they tend to rate themselves differently than reality. They they usually are more consciousness and they are more emotionally stable than if they are taking the test to learn more about themselves. And another problem is accuracy problem, because the result can always be affected by someone's moods. So a candidate who is in a bad mood when taking the survey may have different scores when they are taking it in a good mood. So that accuracy problems may happen from time to time. So next we're going to talk about personality determinants. So according to studies, there is an early debate that centered on whether an individual is a result of heredity or environment. But personality appears to actually be a result of both. However, there is some research that tends to support the importance of heredity more over the importance of environment. So what is heredity? The definition is it refers to factors determined by at conception, such as physical stature, facial features, gender, temperament, etc. So the heredity approach argues that the ultimate explanation of an individual's personality is the molecular structure of the genes, which is located in the chromosomes. This means that someone's personality is mainly created from their biological parents' personality. However, personality is actually more changeable in adolescence and more stable among adults, which this means over time someone's personality can always change, also according to the environment that they grow up in, and there are other factors that can affect someone's personality. And when someone exhibits label enduring characteristics, let's say someone is shy, aggressive, lazy, these characteristics happen in a large number of situations, and if they are relatively enduring over time, we can call them as personality traits. The more consistent the characteristics over time, and the more frequently it occurs in diverse situations, the more important the trait is in describing someone's personality. So, when talking about personality frameworks, many of our behaviors comes from our personalities. Therefore, by understanding someone's personality, it can help us to predict their behaviors. The most widely used and best known personality frameworks is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or we are usually more familiar with the terms the MBTI test. So the MBTI test describes personality of a person by identifying one trait from each of the 4 pairs. So what are the 4 pairs? The 4 pairs including extroverted versus introverted, where extroverted people are usually more outgoing, sociable, and assertive, and introverted people are usually more shy and quiet. Then there is sensing and intuitive, where sensing people are usually more practical and they prefer routine, whereas intuitive people, they usually look more on the big picture rather than sticking out to a routine or an order. And then there is thinking versus feeling, where thinking people, they use reason and logic, and feeling people, they rely on personal values and emotions. And then the last one is judging and perceiving, where people with judging, they usually want control, order, and they prefer structure, whereas perceiving people, they usually are more flexible and spontaneous. But we must also be aware that there are some problems that may arise when using the MBTI test, such as the model forces us to be one type or another. So as an example, you are either introverted or extroverted. So there is no in between those. And there is also reliability of measure. When people retake the assessment, they often receive different results throughout the time, which that means is not very reliable because the result can always change throughout the time. And there's also difficulty of interpretation, where there are levels of importance for each MBTI results and separate meanings for certain combinations. They require trained interpretation, which if not, they can leave some room for error interpretation. And the last one is the MBTI tend to be unrelated to job performance. Although the MBTI can be a valuable tool in increasing self-awareness and providing career guidance, but the results tend to be unrelated to job performance. So, if the MBTI test is considered unrelated to job performance, then what personality framework test that we can use? The answer is the Big 5 personality model. So, why the Big 5 personality model? This test proposes 5 basic dimensions that can underlie all others and encompass most of the significant variation in a human personality. What makes it different from the MBTI test? The Big 5 personality model, they usually do a very good job on predicting how people behave in a variety of real-time situations. And different with the MBTI test, the results usually remain relatively stable over time. So what are the big 5 factors? The first one is consciousness, which is a measure of reliability. People with high consciousness is usually more responsible, organized, dependable, and persistent, whereas people with low consciousness, they usually is more distracted, disorganized, and also unreliable. There's also emotional stability, which a person's ability to withstand stress. So obviously, someone with high emotional stability, they are usually more calm, positive, and more of an optimistic person. Whereas people with low emotional stability, they are usually more nervous, anxious, depressed, and also more insecure. And then the third one, that is an extroversion, which captures our comfort level with relationship or our relationship with other people. People with high extroversion, they are usually more assertive and sociable, and people with low extroversion, they are usually more thoughtful, reserved, timid, and quiet. And also there's openness to experience, which describes the range of interest and fascination with novelty. So people with high openness to experience, they are usually more creative, curious, and they are also more artistically sensitive. Whereas people with low openness to experience, they are usually more conventional, they find comfort in familiarness. And then the last one is agreeableness. So it's about an individual propensity to differ to others. So people with high agreeableness, they are usually more cooperative, warm, and trusting, whereas people with low scores, they are usually more cold and antagonistic. Okay, so how do exactly the big five traits can predict someone's behavior at work? So there are actually many relationships between the big five personality dimension and job performance, which we can see here on the diagram. So as an example, consciousness at work, employees who have high score on consciousness, they usually develop higher levels of job knowledge. And these levels correspond with higher levels of job performance as well. They usually also more persistent, they pay attention to detail, and they have high standards, which was an important key success factors. And people with high conscious score, they usually prioritize work over family. So this is something that we must also consider because it can result in a work-family conflict, and they may also become to focus on their own work and choose to not help other people in the organization. Why? Because people that have high consciousness, they usually focus more on how they perform. Are they performing well rather than helping other people or learning? So consciousness is actually one of the best predictor for job performance, but there are other factors such as emotional stability at work. So people with high emotional stability, they usually related their work with life satisfaction, job satisfaction, and also low stress levels. But people who have high emotional stability at work, they are also more likely to experience a burnout. And then there's extroversion at work. So extroverts people, they usually perform better in jobs with significant interpersonal interactions. But some negatives about the extroverts are they usually more impulsive than the introverts. So they are more likely to be absent from work, and they are also more likely to lie during a job interviews. And then there's also openness at work, where open people, they are more likely to be an effective leader because they cope better with organizational change and are more adaptable. And there's also agreeableness to work. So agreeable individuals are usually better liked than disagreeable people, but they tend to do better in an interpersonally oriented jobs such as customer service. And agreeableness is associated with lower levels of career success, especially when talking about earnings, because highly agreeable people, they consider themselves less marketable and are less willing to assert themselves.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the relationship between personality and behavior in the working world. The types of personality I'm going to talk about is the one mentioned in the previous slides, which mentioned conscientiousness, emotional stability, extroversion, openness, and also agreeableness. So conscientious people at work, they can be seen having higher levels of job knowledge. They're also more able to maintain their job performance. And these types of conscientiousness can be found in the forms of persistence, attention to detail, and also setting high standards. While those are the more positive traits of conscientious people at work, we can also see conscientious people being too focused on their work to help others, them not being able to adapt well to changing contexts, and they also have trouble in learning complex skills early because their focus is in performing well rather than on learning. They're also less creative. And then we move on to emotionally stable people at work. So emotionally stable people at work, they can adapt to unexpected or changing demands in the workplace, while on the other end of the spectrum, some people may experience burnouts. And then we move on to extroverted people at work. These types of people work better in jobs with significant interpersonal interaction. They're socially dominant and they take charge of people. But on the more negative scope, they are more impulsive, they're more likely to become absent from work, and they're more likely to lie during job interviews than introverts. Open people at work can be seen being more effective leaders. They are more comfortable with ambiguity, they're more adaptable to change, they're less likely to have work-family conflict. Meanwhile, agreeable people at work, they're better liked, they do better in interpersonality-oriented jobs such as customer service, they're more compliant, they're more satisfied in jobs, and them being agreeable also contributes to the organizational performance by engaging in organizational citizenship behavior, or the OCB. Then we move on to other personality characters related to organization behavior. So the first one we have the core self-evaluations, or the CSEs. So the CSEs is basically conclusions individuals have about their capabilities, competence, and worth as a person. People with positive CSEs like themselves and is in control of their environment. Therefore, they perform better because they set more ambitious goals, they're more committed, and they persist longer. High CSEs people thrive in organizations with high CSR. And then we have self-monitoring, which is an individual's ability to adjust behavior to external and situational factors. High self-monitors pay closer attention to others, receive better performance ratings, and are more likely to emerge as leaders. They are also more likely to receive promotions. And then we have the proactive personality. These are people who show initiative, take action, and persevere until meaningful change occur. They have higher levels of job performance and do not need much oversight. Proactive personalities often achieve career success. Now we move on to values. Values are basic convictions that a specific mode of conduct or end state of existence is personally or socially preferable to an opposite or converse mode of conduct or end state of existence. Values contain a judgmental element because it carries an individual's ideas about what is right, wrong, and what is desirable. Many values we hold are established in early years through our parents, teachers, and friends. And what is the influence of values in the working world? Well, for example, you believe that allocating pay on the basis of performance is right and allocating pay on the basis of seniority is wrong. And then you find out the organization you just joined allocates pay on seniority, not on work. Then you're likely to be dissatisfied and then not put in much effort because you believe it's not going to lead to more money anyway. And this is an example because let's say you value work because it gives you experience to learn on to become better. So if that's your value, even if even if the condition was joined with the previous state where you're paid based on seniority, not on work, you still do a good job anyway because you believe that the experience is worth it, that you're here to learn. So that's the influence of values in the working world. And then we move on to the terminal and instrumental values. So terminal values are basically the desired end states of a person, or basically, on more easier words, the goal. So here I wrote economic success because some people do want to achieve that. So terminal values are like the goals. And then instrumental values are basically the behavior meant to achieve those terminal values, or the behavior meant to achieve the goals. So here I wrote personal discipline and goal orientation, because that might be the two behavior acts to achieve the goal, which is the economic success.
Generational values, or differences in values from various generations and dominant values that exist in today's world of work. So in Exhibit 5.4, there's 3 generations, but I found 5, including Generation Z, in another source. And we can see that there's visible differences in the dominant work values. From boomers, there's success, achievement, ambition, dislike of authority, loyalty to career. And for Xers, there's work-life balance, team-oriented, dislike of rules, loyalty to relationships. And for the millennials, there's confident, financial success, self-reliant but team-oriented, loyalty to both self and relationships. We can see that generations think differently, but this doesn't define everything because individuals think differently from each other. But instead, we must all learn to eliminate biases and to better tolerate each other through motivation. And next, we're going to discuss about the Hofstede framework. Basically, this is a research that's conducted by Geert Hofstede himself, and his purpose was to categorize the cultures in his ex-workplace IBM. And now I'm going to explain about 5 dimensions that's in the Hofstede framework. The first one is the power distance, and it is the dimension that deals with the fact that all individuals are unequal. And the second one is individualism versus collectivism. It has to do with whether people see their image as I or we. And the third one is masculinity versus femininity. The fundamental issue here is what motivates people, whether people wanting to be the best or liking what they're doing. The fourth one is uncertainty avoidance. Should we try to control or let things happen? A high score means people in a country prefer to work structured over unstructured. And the last one is long-term versus short-term orientation. This measures a society devotion to traditional values. Long-term people usually prefer to look forward to their future, meanwhile the short-term orientation people only looks for what's here and now. To understand more, I'll explain an example of Hofstede framework here in Indonesia. As we can see from the graph, Indonesia power distance score is 78. That means Indonesia is based on hierarchy. There's uneven rights between the power holders and the non-power holders, and the management are so controlling and delegating since the power is so centralized. And the second one, Indonesia scores 48 on uncertainty avoidance. That means that there is a strong preference in Indonesia towards the Javanese culture. Like when a person is upset, it is habitual for them or for us not to show our emotion or our anger to the others. We will keep smiling and be polite no matter how angry we are. Indonesia scores 14 on individualism score. This means Indonesia is a collectivist society. Individuals are expected to be conform to the ideals of the society which they belong to. For example, me as an Indonesian child, I am committed to my parents and so are them to me. This means the parents expect their child, or me, for example, to make their life easier later when they are older. This is why you rarely see elders or grandparents in nursery institution, but instead their children or maybe their grandchildren take care of them at their homes. Moving on to the fourth one, Indonesia masculinity score is 46 and it is considered as low masculine because it's still higher than most North European countries, but it is lower than another Asian countries like China and Japan. This means status and success are important here in Indonesia, but it is not always material gain that brings motivation. Most of the time, it is the position that a person holds that is more important because of this Indonesian concept of gengsi, as we all know. And last but not least, the long-term orientation score of Indonesia is 62 based on the graph. Indonesian people believe that truth depends on pretty much on the situation, context, and time, and this is called pragmatic. They demonstrate an ability to adjust traditions in a dynamic environment. In conclusion, chapter 4 and 5 shows us that emotions are a normal component in a workplace. So, good management should not imply producing an emotion-free atmosphere. Another thing, personality matters to organizational behavior. It may not explain all behavior, but it establishes the context. Also, always remember that every characteristic has benefits and drawbacks, and there is no perfect combination. But the more we examine people's diverse cultures, the more we will be able to predict their work behavior, and that will help us on building a healthy and high-performing organizational culture. With that, it closes today's discussion. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and we are more than happy to hear your critiques, thoughts, and questions. So bye, see you all on Thursday.